Hi, and welcome to NSREC Now, a new video series covering everything you need to know about the IEEE Nuclear and Space Radiation Effects Conference. In this episode, we'll cover oral and poster presentations and provide helpful tips to help you deliver an excellent oral and poster presentation at the conference. I'm Greg Allen of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I'm here today with a group of panelists that have written numerous papers in the field and delivered many high-quality presentations at NSREC and other venues. So join me in welcoming Dr. Marta Bagatin from the University of Padova, Dr. Rob Baumann from Radiosity Solutions and Southern Methodist University, and Dr. Jonathan Pellish from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, who will provide their insight into today's topic. Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, I should mention that this panel will focus on oral and poster presentations. We have an upcoming video that will specifically focus on radiation effects data workshop presentations, so please be on the lookout for that one. Let's start by talking about the presentation format for oral and poster presentations. What do these typically look like at NSREC conferences? Johnny, will you please take this first question?
Sure. Thanks very much, Greg. So the presentations fall into a couple of different categories. The first one for oral presentations is to a dedicated audience. The presentation time slots are typically 12 minutes in length with 3 minutes for question and answer. And then also as part of the conference, we have a range of poster presentations. These are typically a 4-foot by 8-foot format in a large exhibit space with an audience that's moving around and interacting with each one of the poster presenters in turn. Submitters to the conference have an option to request an oral or a poster presentation, and then the technical program committee reviews those requests against the technical content and makes the ultimate decision about what the format will be, whether oral or a poster presentation.
Great. Thank you, Johnny. Marta, would you like to add to that at all?
So, this year, we know that it's an exceptional year. So this year we are going to show pre-recorded presentations for oral talks, and the poster presenter will have the opportunity to discuss their posters and answer attendees' questions in a poster session.
So this next question is a little more philosophical, and it's about your process. So what I'm going to ask you is to walk me through your process for going from an abstract to an oral or poster presentation. This is a really kind of high-level thought process in terms of breaking down that abstract and beginning to think about how you would present it. So how would one go about this if they've never done it before? I think, Rob, I'd like to start with you, please.
Okay. Well, obviously, a poster and an oral are two totally different animals. So the process tends to be different, at least for myself. And the thing that I see, I guess the biggest mistake, and I know this is maybe pre-charging for other questions, but kind of the biggest error or challenge is that new people that are trying to do a poster for the first time or an oral try to put as much of their paper into that final work as possible. And unfortunately, that tends to be kind of a common mistake. And it leads to confusion when the paper is being presented. So one thing, I guess, from a process point of view, I try to extract a headline, and I find, if you could summarize your paper not in a title but in a headline, like a newspaper headline, or maybe two sentences, what would be the finding, or why should someone want to pay attention to your paper, whether it be oral or the poster. And I think that's the starting place for me. And I think we should open it up to the others just to get their concept if it's different or the same.
Sure. Marta or Johnny, would either of you like to take the rest of this question?
Well, I perfectly agree with Rob. And in fact, I believe that the real difficult part of making a good presentation is selecting the right amount of material from your paper, because you cannot show everything that is in your paper. So I absolutely agree with this. And only after one has chosen the right figures and the right facts around which you want to build your presentation or poster, only after then you can start to go to do a good work. Yeah.
How about you, Johnny?
I would say I agree with the previous comments. I guess my organizing principle has always been to first decide what story I want to tell, because with the technical content, you can tell multiple stories. And so once you decide what story you want to tell, that tells you what figures or equations, tables, data that you need in order to tell that story, and really nothing more. And then it goes back to, I think, some prior discussions that we've had about essentially referring the audience members to the paper itself, or perhaps an offline discussion. So keeping laser focused on the story that you mean to tell, that way you end up with a very compact, efficient presentation that's easy to understand. And I think that applies to both oral and poster presentations.
And one thing I'd just like to say also, I think once that's been established and you kind of have at least a mental outline for the narrative, if you will, one thing that's very helpful is, they've done cognitive studies and basically seen that most people listening to presentations are lucky if they go home with three main points of the presentation. So if you've got 15 topics that you want to cover, probably that's too much. I don't want to give a number, but typically, a single point or maybe a couple points is about the right size. The other thing is to repetition is huge. Prior political figures have used repetition much to their advantage. And I think that, at least in the oral presentation, if you introduce the concept and say, I'm going to show you X, Y, and Z, and then in the middle you go, here's X, here's Y, here's Z. And then in the summary, you'd say, and this is what we learned today, X, Y, and Z. People will walk away with a much better understanding and memory of your presentation.
Very good points all around. And this kind of leads into the next question, and it may be a bit redundant, but what do you think makes the best presentation stand out? What's that one thing to you that takes a presentation and just pushes it over all the others? So what are some practical suggestions or tips for preparing a presentation that will stand out? Marta, why don't you begin, please?
Yeah, so I immediately take the suggestion of Rob, and repetition are good. So I'm going to stress once more that it's very important to convey a clear and focused message. That's the first important thing that, in my opinion, is at the top to be able to build a great presentation, being this a talk or a poster. Another point that is extremely important to me is to clearly present the motivations, the purpose, the objective at the beginning of your talk. Don't wait until the end of your presentation before stating what is the novelty, why the work is important, what is the difference from previous work on that subject, and so on. This is really important to drive directly people into your talk. And then concerning practical suggestion, I would say that as far as my own practice, I usually start with figures. So I select the figures on which I want to build the story around, and then I start building up the presentation or the poster. And that's for sure the most important tip I have.
Wonderful, thank you. Rob or Johnny, do you have any follow-ons to that?
I guess, that it was pretty well answered by Marta, but, the thing for me is most people are visual thinkers. So pictures are way better than words, because if you put a lot of text up there or a whole bunch of equations, unless they're really critical to the talk, I leave those for the papers and just have, really clear plots, not too many lines. So just like the rule with the topics, if you've got a plot with 20 lines on it, chances are people aren't going to be able to assimilate all that while you're talking. So, simplified plots and graphics really go a long way.
I would just say to keep in mind, the radiation effects community is really diverse, and there are a lot of different stakeholders and different audience members that are coming with their own perspectives and needs. And based on what Marta and Rob just said, also trying to think about what portions of the potential audience you're really trying to reach. Are you trying to reach, and at what point in the life cycle of a space mission are those people really involved? And that gets to the motivation of the objectives of the work. And I think that can help tailor, further refine the scope of your either oral or poster presentation. If you're also coupling into that sort of decision space, how you want to reach which audience members.
Very insightful. Thank you, Johnny. So for an oral presentation, the time is very structured, right? We have 12 minutes for presentation and 3 minutes for questions. Now for a poster presentation, it's a little more ad hoc, right? So, you're standing there and you want to get a message across, and different people have different philosophies. So how long do you think that presentation should be, right? It's going to be interactive. Certainly there'll be opportunity for conversation and questions with your audience, but what's the approach to kind of get your main message across in a poster presentation? How long should that take, and what are some of the philosophies there? Johnny, you're next up in 2022 for poster chair. So why don't you please start with this question?
Thanks very much, Greg. I think there are really two opportunities you have to reach audience members with a poster presentation. The first opportunity, you'll find people visiting posters that they've pre-selected based on the topic. They have particular concepts, they have particular technical sessions that they're interested in, and they're probably going to identify your poster ahead of time. And so those are the folks that you also have opportunities to probably have deeper conversations with. They're going to want to know more about the technical details. They may want to follow up for other offline conversations. So you kind of get that for free, which is always beneficial to get things rolling. The other opportunity that you will have are really those ad hoc engagements. And that's really based on sort of thinking of your poster as an advertisement. Imagine yourself, and I used this analogy earlier this week, actually. Imagine yourself in sort of a crowded food market, and you're trying to sell something. I think I used the analogy that you might be trying to sell food or something like that, and you have competitors around you. What are you giving, or what are you presenting with your poster that's going to differentiate your poster from the posters that are around you that are likely going to be in your session, or they're, perhaps neighboring in different sessions? If I'm just walking through the poster session, what is going to attract me to stop and engage your poster? And this gets to some of the commentary that we've already had about, condensing things down to a headline, a major bullet point, a major takeaway. It could be a single figure. What are you going to highlight on that real estate that you have that is, in the case of 2021, virtual or digital real estate, or hopefully in the case of the future meetings, we'll go back to an in-person format. You have limited physical real estate to get that point across. And so you have to think of it as, how am I attracting people to the message that I'm trying to convey, and kind of approaching your poster that way. It's a very crowded, information overloaded, typically scenario. So anything you can do to cut through that to convey the important takeaways is valuable.
Thank you, Johnny. That was very good. Marta or Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
So basically, totally agree with that. I think that's exactly correct. The one additional point I would make is the concept of kind of marketing at a hierarchical architecture, or to put it more bluntly, as Johnny specified, you have a number of different customer types. Those that already are excited to talk to you, those that are walking by and may be excited to talk to you, and those that may not even know that they want to talk to you. And so your job in terms of making a poster is to really try to get the entire audience. And I think, as was discussed previously, a hierarchical approach is really important for that. So some people, they just want to see that bullet point and, hey, what did you do? What was your result? So you need to address that. Typically a headline fashion is good. I always like some plots or images because that, appeals to a lot of people's visual centers. And then people have mentioned putting a QR code or having paper copies of the technical paper there for those that want more detail. So, I see kind of three levels of hierarchy. One is the so-called elevator speech, so you've got 5 to 30 seconds to kind of convince someone that they should talk to you. Then there's something more in the middle where they want to know some details. What was the experiment? And then kind of the deep level of like, hey, what exactly did you do? What do you think about your results kind of discussion? And those all represent different time scales. And I think you really have to try to hit all three to maximize the audience participation.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Rob. Marta, would you like to close that out with any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Johnny and Rob. And in this way, I would say that the job of a poster presenter is in fact more difficult, even more difficult with respect to an oral presenter. An oral presenter has to tell the same story to all the audience. The poster presenter has to have many different stories in mind, depending on who is the listener in that moment. So I think that's also an important point.
Yeah, that's great advice. So we've talked about what makes a really good presentation. Now I want to talk about some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen during oral and poster presentations and what presenters can do to avoid them. Rob, would you like to start off with this one?
Yeah, as having done a bad oral myself, I feel like I have experience on this. My mistake was probably the most common mistake. I tried to do too much in too little time. 12 minutes is, that goes by so fast. You really have to be hyper organized. And the key, again, is to try to cut down to the absolute minimum. What is the essence of what you're trying to communicate? And that's all you have time for. So that's really kind of short and sweet, but really trying to distill your results, your findings, your excitement into 12 minutes is just amazingly hard. And so the challenge is really how much can you take away from your initial paper or the concept and actually distill it down to just the key components. And as I said, probably somewhere between 1 to 3 findings is a good number. Some people can manage to do more. That's a rule of thumb for myself. And in terms of actual slides, everyone speaks at a different rate. Some people can go through slides very quickly and effectively. I cannot. I tend to overtalk on slides. So I have a rule for myself, usually 2 to 3 minutes for content slides. So you're talking about 4 content slides for a 12-minute presentation, just to put it in perspective.
Thanks, Rob. Marta, how about you? Any mistakes that you'd like to point out and how to avoid them?
Yeah, in addition to Rob's point, which is absolutely important, of course, the pace is critical. So I've seen many speakers going too fast because, they have too many slides or too much material. And so absolutely, this is something strictly connected with what Rob was saying. Then also, I think that something we should also think about is the use of the pointer. So not using the pointer appropriately can be distracting. So it's another frequent problem to see people using the pointer too much or too little, not using it at all. So I think that pointing, highlighting the parts of the plots you are showing, the figures you are describing is very important to make your explanation effective and much easier to follow. And finally, another thing I would say is don't use too many colors. Don't use too many colors and too many animations. This can be distracting, so try to use them appropriately. A balanced number of colors. Use the colors maybe in a consistent way in your presentation. For instance, if you are showing the behavior of 2 devices, you can consistently use one color for a type of device, another color for another type of device in a consistent way. Then, of course, having very small figures is another common problem, not readable plots, but I think that's really, really easy to fix, but that's another common problem.
Thank you. I've been guilty of overactive laser pointing and over animating myself. So those are great tips. Johnny, would you like to close out with any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I have a few. I think to the earlier points about pacing for oral presentations, I find it helpful for the first slide. I like to actually script out or almost memorize the first slide for me personally. Given that you have so little time, if you waste some of that introduction by not entering into the content crisply in the way that you mean to start the rest of the narrative. You can actually doom the end of your presentation, which is where you're trying to really hammer home the discussion and the key conclusions, because you'll end up having to rush because the red light is coming on or the session chair is creeping up behind you to pull you off the stage from your oral, or if you're recording the presentation for a virtual forum, you'll be rushing to get through the end of it. So having that sort of well-rehearsed, well-oiled introduction can really save you for the pacing throughout the rest of the talk. And then I think beyond that, that the rules or the guidance for both orals and poster presentations, maybe more on the technical side, is to keep the information density as low as reasonably achievable. So trying to focus on telling a story around a figure or an image on the chart, as opposed to having a high amount of text density. Because I think what you'll find is that the audience members, whether it's an oral or poster presentation, will sit there and they will read the chart and they won't pay attention to what you're trying to tell them. And that can be distracting for the audience members, and it can cause them to miss a key point that you're trying to make. I think beyond that, it's just sort of a good practice for using sans serif fonts, fonts that are large enough, things that are high contrast, avoiding light colors on light backgrounds, that sort of thing, just to make sure that things are easily observable if you're in the back of the room, if you're looking at things on a small computer screen, or in particular, if you're in the poster session, making sure that someone who is 3, 4, maybe 5 feet away, because you have 1 or 2 people deep at your poster, can they actually read the content on it from a distance away? The same graphical design, good graphical design principles hold for posters as well as for oral presentations.
That was great advice, everyone. So here's one, especially for new presenters in general. It can be very daunting stepping up in front of 500 of the world's radiation effects experts. But then comes the question and answer portion of your presentation. And so do you have any suggestions for speakers to effectively handle audience questions, how to prepare for those questions prior to your talk, and how to handle challenging questions while you're, after you've given your talk and you're hosting those questions from the audience? Rob, would you like to start?
Yeah, that's a little tougher one since it kind of, the questions are, some are anticipated, and then it's the ones that are unanticipated, or especially ones from left field. And sometimes the questions lets you know that your talk was actually not effective because people come to the wrong conclusions. I've had that happen. That's always a learning moment. I guess the main thing is for new presenters that may be daunted by a large audience of so-called experts. To me, just remember that you touched your research more than anybody in that room. So really just don't feel like, and generally people don't ask questions to be mean or to point out errors. They really want to know, either something wasn't clear or they had a thought and they were like, hey, is this like that? So if you just think about it from the point of view that you are the expert in the subject that you're talking about, at least from a confidence point of view, it should maybe reduce some of the nervousness that can happen. So that's about it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Marta or Johnny, do you have anything to add to that?
First of all, I would say, especially for new people, remember that your session chair is there to help you. So that's the main fact that you should always keep in mind. And then, if you receive a complex question, there is no reason to panic. Try to summarize the question, to highlight the main point, just to make sure that you've got the right question. Also, very often questions come about have you tried this, or do you plan to look at this, or do you plan to do that? So in this case, I suggest to try to answer in as more constructive way as possible. So try to avoid answering simply yes or no I didn't do this, or yes, I will do it. So please try to provide some arguments for your answer. Try to be constructive. And possibly you can also highlight potential future work or potential developments of what you've done. And finally, the tougher part, what do you do if you don't know the answer to your question? Well, stay calm. There is no way to, you can say that you don't know the answer, just say it. Say that you're probably going to discuss this with your co-author, and just offer to maybe talk with the attendees later at the coffee break or at the virtual room or something like that. So
Good
that's
advice.
my advice.
Thank you, Marta. Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you. Johnny, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, particularly for new presenters, but I think it applies just as well to folks who have been presenting for many years. Do dry runs, particularly dry runs to audiences. And I think we're all well versed at doing things virtually now, maybe much more so than we were before. So getting friends, colleagues, coworkers, whoever you can find together to demo the work, whether it's a poster presentation, people can review a PDF of the poster, or if it's an oral presentation, ask for 10 minutes, 12 minutes of their time is not much. And you will uncover a lot of things that are very easy to fix at that point. And the return on investment is significant. You may uncover some easy questions that can be answered by just, tweaking one slide or changing the order of bullets. And you might also uncover a better organization of the charts, maybe flipping the order around. So just getting some of that feedback and making it so that it's not so new when you go up there to present it for the first time, whether it's a poster or an oral presentation. Definitely take advantage of the friends and colleagues. It's worth the investment.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. So maybe this is the last year that this is going to be part of our process, hopefully. But do you have any tips for presenters who are recording virtual presentations, in particular for NSREC 2021? Marta, you're going to be leading some of these efforts as the short course chair this year. So why don't you start with that question, please?
Yeah, sure. So the first advice I have is try to act like if you were really in front of the audience. Like if you are really speaking in front of 500 people. So that's I think the main point here. So try to look in the webcam, try to be more natural as possible. I would also suggest to avoid writing down what you're saying, because this will probably make your talk extremely unnatural and may look as your slides are somehow not connected with what you're saying. So try to be more natural as possible. And going back to Johnny's suggestion, I would say dry run and practice one time more rather than one time less. So that's it.
Yeah, for sure. Rob or Johnny, do you have any closing thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I agree with everything. I think practice, regardless of whether it's virtual or real, is a big thing, especially for the oral. I know I'm going off topic for a second here, but the oral is 12 minutes, and that is just such a short time. One thing I recommend is try going through your talk without a timer first, and then do it again, trying to hit the 12 minutes. And you'll see, that'll tell you how many slides you have to remove or how to simplify. And that works again for the oral, whether it's virtual or not. And the other thing with virtual, because of all the technology now that we can basically record ourselves, I strongly recommend you record yourself on the first few tries. I like Johnny's concept of getting as big an audience or as many friends in on it. That's for sure very important. But even self-study, if you record yourself, it's going to be uncomfortable watching yourself, I can tell you. at least for most people. But you'll find mistakes and you'll say, oh, I got to stop looking down at my notes. I got to keep looking at the camera, that sort of thing. So that's about it.
Thanks, Rob. Johnny, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would say for virtual presentations, other than kind of the practical need of deciding what your camera setup is going to be, how you want to use headphones, you want to use the built-in mic to a tablet or a laptop or something like that. To Marta's point about being able to deliver a natural presentation. I have a standing desk. If you don't have a standing desk, you can do a setup where you stack your tablet or your laptop, your camera on top of books at your desk. I actually like recording virtual presentations while I'm standing because that's how you would be delivering it if you were at a meeting. And your posture is different. If I'm sitting in a chair right now, but your posture is different. Your hand motions might be different. If you're sitting versus if you record yourself while you're standing. And I find that also helps. It helps my nerves a little bit if I'm recording myself while I'm standing up. It's just easier for me. It may not work that well for you, but I think it's worth trying as part of the dry run process. You may find it to be a lot easier to get through the presentation while you're standing.
That's a great tip, Johnny. Thank you. So that's all the questions that I had for the panel. Do any of you have any closing thoughts or any messages you'd like to get across to any of our viewers before I close the conversation?
Don't forget to have fun. You put in an enormous amount of work to get the content to the point where you've gone from an idea to an abstract to a paper to an oral presentation or a poster, but also getting to deliver that presentation, whether you're delivering it in the poster session or you're delivering it in one of the technical oral sessions, is kind of the culmination of all that work. And it in and of itself is kind of a celebration of all that investment. So make sure to enjoy it. The first time or two you do it, you probably won't remember it that well. You kind of, the being on stage is kind of an out-of-body experience a little bit the first few times you do it. And then you step down and you don't realize that 15 minutes just evaporated out of your life. But trying to kind of appreciate the moment, I think is also really important. And it kind of makes you want to come back and do it again, oddly enough.
Thanks, Johnny. That's great. So just a big thanks to our panelists for taking the time to walk through some of the best practices for preparing a strong oral and poster presentation. Please keep an eye out for upcoming videos focusing on how to deliver a strong radiation effects data workshop presentation. That'll be coming soon. And then please be sure to follow us on social media and stay connected with the NSREC community. Check out our website for more information about the conference and how to find out how you can become an IEEE member. The links are in the description below. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode of NSREC Now.